Okay, hi guys. I don't know if anybody's actually keeping up or listening, but I am back. I was out for the holidays and my son is in travel hockey, so we've been a little crazy lately. So I'm gonna start with chapter 3 today. We'll see how far we get. Well, it'll probably just be chapter 3 because my son's in practice and it's an hour long, but I just wanted to say now that the holiday's over and all the craziness has gone down a little bit, I can try to get back on this. I want to also start the other 2 books, but I figured I should get a few chapters into this one before I commit to starting 2 more. While I'm looking for my chapter, I should have found it before I hit record. It is almost baby time. I'm due March the 8th, but I'm almost always several months early, or weeks, not months, several weeks early. I'm usually 3 weeks early. My last one is 5 weeks early. We're taking some preventative measures so that we're not that early this time, but there might be a small dip in my reading, or I might read a little bit more while I'm in the hospital and it's quiet and all my kids aren't there. But for now, chapter 3, the ghost takes the bride, the crown prince mounts the bridal sedan. You'll have to let me know if you like it better with or without the music. I put just the Moda Zushi Grandmaster piano version on repeat, and that's just what I had available through Spotify. So if you like that, or I can try to find something related to Heaven Official Blessing, but you'll have to excuse me, I'm in my car as usual, but I'm a little more cramped. Alrighty. One of the sedan carriers wasn't paying attention and stepped on an arm. He screamed without thinking, and then immediately the entire wedding procession was in an uproar. Good Lord, that band of men whipped out their shining broadswords. They yelled, "What's the matter? Has it come?" Commotion had broken out into the streets. When Shilian looked closely, the body with its head severed wasn't a real person, but a wooden puppet. "Too ugly," Fu Yao commented again. The master just happened to be coming over with the copper teapot. Shilian recalled his attitude yesterday, so he asked the shopkeep, "I saw that group of people banging drums and gongs yesterday. I see them doing the same again today. What are they doing?" Sorry, I'm trying to get some more light. There we go. "Seeking their own ruin," the tea master said. Shilian wasn't surprised. "Are they trying to lure out that ghost groom?" "What do you think?" the tea master replied. "The father of a missing bride will award a great sum of money to whoever finds his daughter and captures that ghost groom. So that group has been messing around all day, every day, creating a foul atmosphere. His father, who was awarding the bounty, must be the Lord Official." Shilian looked another glance at the crassly built head of a woman, knowing the men were attempting to disguise the puppet as the bride. Fu Yao commented in disgust, "If I were that groom, I'd wipe out this entire troop for sending such an ugly thing to me." "Fu Yao, you're not speaking as an immortal should," Shilian said. "And can you fix that eye-rolling habit of yours? Why don't you set a small target for yourself first, and only roll 5 times a day, or something like that?" "Set it at 50 times a day, and it won't be enough," Nanfeng added. Just then, a young man suddenly poked out from the procession, spunky and spirited. Judging by sight, he was the leader. He raised his arm and hollered, "Listen to me! Listen to me! It's completely useless to keep this up. How many times have we made this trip in the last few days? Has the ghost groom ever shown itself? The group of men agreed and started to grumble while that youth continued. I think since we started this, we should just do it and charge right up Mount Eugene. We'll search the mountain and drag that ugly freak out to kill it. I'll lead the way. Any good, brave men can follow me. Kill the ugly freak and we'll split the bounty. There were only a small and scattered number of men who answered his call, but the voices gradually grew bigger and louder, and in the end everyone was roaring in agreement, surprisingly sounding rather immense in strength. Shilian wondered, ugly freak? Shopkeeper, what's the ugly freak they're talking about? The tea master replied, apparently the ghost groom is an ugly creature living on Mount Eugene, and because it's so ugly, no woman loves it. That's why it grew hate in its heart and began robbing others of their brides to ruin their happy occasions. The scroll from the palace of Lingwen didn't record this. Shilian wondered, is that explanation true? Is it not speculation? Who knows? The master replied. Apparently quite a few people have seen it. Its entire face is wrapped in bandages with savage eyes peering out. It doesn't know how to talk and can only growl like a wolfhound. The rumors are quite bizarre. Just because its face is wrapped in bandages doesn't mean it's ugly. There's also the possibility that it's so beautiful that it doesn't want others to see, Fu Yao said. The tea master was speechless for a moment. Who knows? Either way, I've never seen it. Right then a young girl's voice came from the street. Don't listen to him! Don't go! Mount Eugene is a very dangerous place. The one who spoke while hiding at a street corner was the girl who was praying for blessings at the temple of Nanyang last night. Xiaoying, when Shilian saw her face, he could feel his own aching and subconsciously rubbed his cheek. That youth appeared grim when he saw her, and he shoved her. What's a little woman doing interrupting when the big men are talking? Xiaoying cowered a little when she was shoved, but then she gathered her courage and said in a small voice, Don't listen to him. Whether it's faking a wedding procession or searching the mountain, aren't you all seeking your own deaths by doing something so dangerous? Well, don't you make it sound nice, the youth rebuked. Us guys are putting our lives on the line to exterminate evil for the people, but what about you? Selfish and greedy, refusing to play the role of the fake bride and get on the sedan. You don't have half the courage of the people here, but now you're here to obstruct us. What are you scheming? He shoved her with every word, making everyone inside the shop frown at the sight. Shilian looked down and unwrapped the bandages on his wrists as he heard the tea master speak. That Xiao Peng too wanted to coax that girl into playing the fake bride before. His words sweet like honey, but the girl refused, so now he's changed face. On the street, the group of burly men also exclaimed, Stop standing there blocking our way! Move aside! When Xiaoying saw this, her flat face was flushed bright red, tears rolling in her eyes. Why? Why must you talk like this? That youth Xiao Peng too continued. Was I wrong? I told you to play the fake bride, and did you not refuse? Xiaoying replied, It's true that I didn't dare do it, but you didn't have to slash my dress. The moment she mentioned this, Xiao Peng too instantly jumped as if he had stubbed his toe. He pointed at her face and yelled, You ugly freak! Don't slander people around here. Me? Slash your dress? Are you taking me for blind? Who knows if you didn't do it yourself because you want to flash people? As if anyone would want to see an ugly face like yours, even with a ripped dress. Don't blame this on me. Nanfeng couldn't bear to listen anymore, and the teacup shattered in his hands with a crack. Just as he was about to stand up, however, a white silhouette drifted past. At that time, Xiao Peng too was jumping a foot high, yelped and fell on his butt on the ground, holding his face while blood dripped between the cracks of his fingers. No one in the crowd had a chance to see what exactly happened before the boy was already sitting on the ground. At first, they thought it was Xiao Ying who went berserk, yet when they looked at her, they couldn't actually see her. A white-clad cultivator had come and shielded her. Shi Lian tucked his hands in his sleeves, not bothering to look back. He grinned happily at Xiao Ying, bending lightly at the waist to meet her eyes. "Miss, I was wondering if I might have the pleasure of inviting you inside for a cup of tea." Xiao Pengtu was sprawled on the ground. His mouth and nose were in excruciating pain. His entire face was in agony, as if he'd just been cracked brutally by a steel whip. Yet this cultivator clearly didn't carry any weapons, nor did Xiao Pengtu see how the man had struck or what he had used to strike. He scrambled to crawl up and brandish his blade and yelled, "This man used wicked magic!" When the group of burly men behind him heard wicked magic, they all brandished their broadswords. Yet, unexpectedly, Nan Feng suddenly struck with his hand from behind, and crack! A pillar snapped and broke. Having witnessed such godly strength, the group of burly men instantly lost color in their faces. Although stricken with fear, Xiao Pengtu still remained stubborn and shouted at them as he ran away. "I'll concede defeat today. Where did you fellow good men come from? Leave your names and we'll meet again someday." Sorry. Nan Feng didn't even care to answer him, but next to him Fu Yao replied, very kind. This one is from the Temple of Ju." Nan Feng struck out another hand, and those two began to spar soundlessly. Shi Lian wanted to invite the little maiden in to sit for a bit at first, order some fruit tea or something, yet before he could, she walked off on her own while wiping away tears. He sighed, watching that retreating back, then went back inside himself. When he entered the tea shop, the tea master chided, "Remember to pay for that pillar." Thus, when Shi Lian sat down, he turned to Nan Feng. "Remember to pay for that pillar." ... replied Nan Feng. "Before that, let's focus on proper business," Shi Lian said. "Who can lend me some spiritual powers? I need to enter the communication array to verify some information." Nan Feng raised his hand, and the two clapped palms as an oath, counting it as binding an extremely simple contract. Thus Shi Lian could finally enter the communication array once more. The moment he entered, he heard Ling Wen say, "Your Highness finally managed to borrow some spiritual powers? Is everything in the north going well? Were the two junior martial officials who volunteered themselves any help?" Shi Lian looked up and glanced at the pillar Nan Feng snapped with a palm earlier. Then he glanced at Fu Yao, who was currently resting with his eyes closed, wearing a cold and distant expression. He then replied, "The two junior martial officials both have their own values, and they are both talents worth nurturing." Ling Wen chuckled. "Then we must congratulate General Nan Yang and General Zhao Xin. On your Highness's words, the future of those junior martial officials must be infinite, and they will soon ascend themselves." It wasn't long before Mu Qing's voice surfaced coolly. "He didn't inform me of this outing, so let him be. Either way, I don't know anything." "You really are lurking in the communication array all day," Shi Lian thought. "Your Highness," Ling Wen said, "where have you settled? The north is guarded by General Pei. His worshippers are abundant. If your Highness has any need, you can stay temporarily at his temples of Mingguang." "There's no need for the trouble," Shi Lian replied. "We didn't find any temple of Mingguang nearby, so we settled in the temple of Nanyang. A quick question, Ling Wen. About this ghost groom, do you have any more information?" "Yes," Ling Wen replied. "The result of its rank evaluation was just processed by my palace. It's a wrath." "A wrath?" In regard to monsters, demons, and ghosts that caused a great turmoil within the mortal realm, the Palace of Lingwing had categorized them based on their abilities. The ranks were as follows: fierce, malice, wrath, and supreme. A fierce murdered one. A malice could murder a sect. A wrath could slaughter an entire city. As for the most fearsome supremes, once they were born into this world, they were destined to bring ruin to nations and people and complete disorder everywhere. The ghost groom that had been holding up in Mount Eugene was ranked a wrath, only one level lower than a supreme. That meant no one who saw it could escape unharmed. Thus, after Shilian exited the communication array and informed the other two of this, Nanfang said, "Then the ugly bandaged male is probably just a rumor, or they saw something else." "There's another possibility," Shilian said. "Like, for example, under certain circumstances, this ghost groom will not or cannot cause harm." Fu Yao said disapprovingly, "The Palace of Lingwen is so inefficient, taking this long only to come up with a rank. What's the use?" "At the very least, we have an understanding of the enemy's strength," Jilian said. "But since this is a wrath, the Ghost Groom's spiritual powers must be very strong, and a fake puppet will not be able to deceive it at all. If we want to lure it out, then we can't cast camouflage spell on puppets for wedding processions, and we can't carry weapons either. The most important thing is, the bride must be a living person." "We'll just find a woman on the streets and use as bait," Fu Yao said. Nanfeng, however, rejected the idea. "No." "Why not?" Fu Yao said. "Think they'll be unwilling? Give them a sum of money and they'll be willing then." "Fu Yao, even if there are women who are willing, it's best if we don't attempt to employ this method," Shilian said. "This ghost groom is a wrath. If there are any mishaps, nothing will happen to us, but if the bride is kidnapped, a meek woman won't be able to escape or fight back, so it's certain death for her." "If we can't use women, then we have to use men," Fu Yao said. Nanfeng said, "Where are we going to find a man who's willing to—" He trailed off and the two gazed over. Shilian was sitting there, smiling. He looked at them questioningly. Nighttime, the Temple of Nanyang. Shilian emerged from behind the back of the temple, with hair down and flowing, looking disheveled. The two standing guard by the temple entrance looked, and Nanfeng swore, "Fuck!" right on the spot before charging out. Shilian was speechless for a moment and then said, "Was that necessary?" No matter who looked, they could tell with one glance that this was a handsome man with gentle brows. But this was precisely the reason why many would be unable to stand the image of a perfectly good, handsome man wearing a woman's wedding dress. Here's the picture. Whoop, let's see. Nanfeng, for example, couldn't bear it at all, which is why his reaction was so extreme. Shilian saw Fu Yao was standing there, scanning him up and down, with a complicated look. "Is there anything you wish to say?" Fu Yao nodded. "If I were the ghost groom and someone sent a woman like this to me—" "You'd wipe out the entire town, was it?" Shilian finished for him. Fu Yao replied frigidly, "No, I'd kill the woman." Shilian smiled. "Then I can only say thank goodness I'm not a woman." Fu Yao said, "I think... Why don't you go ask in the communication array now to see if there's any heavenly official who's willing to teach you transformation magic? That would be more practical." There certainly were several heavenly officials who, on account of their own unique needs, knew transformation magic. However, it was probably too late to learn now. Over on the other side, Nanfeng came back with a gloomy face. He was much calmer after having sworn, a trait that was truly entirely the same as the general he served. Seeing it was getting late, Shilian said, Whatever, it's all the same when the veil goes on. He was about to put the covering on when Fu Yao raised his hand to stop him. Hang on. You don't know how that ghost groom harms people. If he raises the veil and feels deceived, wouldn't that just provoke unnecessary trouble? Rage is unpredictable and events can take unexpected turns. Shilian thought that made sense, but when he took a step, he heard rip. The red wedding dress Fu Yao got him really didn't fit that well. A woman's form was much daintier. After he put on the dress, while the waist was surprisingly just fine, he was severely restricted in raising his arms and lifting his feet. When the movement was too wide, the robes ripped. Just as he was looking everywhere to see where the fabric had torn, a voice came from the entrance of the temple. Excuse me? The three looked at the source of the sound and saw Xiaoying, holding a properly folded white robe in her hands while standing at the entrance of the temple. She was watching them with trepidation. I remember it was here where I met you, so I wanted to come over to see if I'd run into you again. I've washed these clothes. I'll put them here. Thanks so much for yesterday and today. Shilian was just going to smile in response when he suddenly remembered his own appearance and decided it was best if he didn't speak or scare people. Yet, unexpectedly, not only was Xiaoying not frightened, she took another step forward. Are you... If you like, I can help. No, miss, please don't misunderstand. This isn't a hobby of mine, Shilian explained. Xiaoying quickly replied, I know. What I meant was, I can help you if you don't mind. You guys are going to catch the ghost groom, right? Her voice and expression both lifted instantly. I know how to tailor clothes. I've got needles and thread on me at all times. I can help fix anywhere that doesn't fit, and I can even help with makeovers. Let me help you. Since time passed, and Shilian once again emerged from the back of the temple with his head down. This time the bridal veil was already in place. Nanfang and Fu Yao had wanted to take a look at first, but in the end they decided to cherish their eyes. The sedan they called over was already waiting by the entrance of the temple, and the carefully selected sedan carriers had also been waiting for a long time. It was a night where the moon was obscured and the winds raised. Adorned in a brand new wedding dress, the crown prince thus mounted the bright red bridal sedan. The entire body of that bridal sedan was dressed in a bright red satin, which was embroidered with colored threads spelling the words blooming flowers and full moon. And dragon and phoenix bring prosperity. Idioms meaning perfect happiness and extremely good fortune. Nanfang and Fu Yao were on the right and left respectively, escorting the bridal sedan on either side. Shilian sat poised within the sedan, swaying along with the movement of the sedan carriers. The 8 sedan carriers carrying the large palanquin were all outstanding military officials. In order to find expertly skilled sedan carriers to play the part of the wedding procession, Nanfang and Fu Yao went directly to that lord official's residence and demonstrated their power, then revealing that they planned to probe Mount Yujun that night. Without a word, the officials summoned a squad of big, tall military officials. However, it wasn't in the hope of extra help that the expertly skilled were chosen, rather so that when the Wrath Ghost launched the attack, they could run away and protect themselves. But in truth, it was actually those 8 military officers who were secretly looking down on them. They were the top #1 experts at the government office and leaders of outstanding heroes wherever they went. Yet those 2 pretty boys were riding over their heads and had ordered them to be sedan carriers. It wouldn't be wrong to say they were quite upset. The master's order had to be followed, so they forcibly suppressed the disdain in their hearts. Nonetheless, it was difficult to avoid the frustration flaring up. So every so often they purposely jerked their legs or shake their hands, making the sedan ride quite bumpy. Others might not be able to tell, but if the one sitting inside the sedan was just a bit weaker and more delicate, they would have probably puked their guts out. The sedan bumped, and sure enough, they had heard Shilian inside the sedan let out a low sigh. The military officials couldn't help but feel rather proud inwardly. Outside, Fu Yao said coolly, "What's the matter, miss? Tears of joy at finally marrying at your old age?" Indeed, when a bride left home for the first time, many teared up and wept in the bridal sedan. Shilian didn't know whether to laugh or cry, but when he spoke, his voice was calm and natural, revealing nothing of discomfort from the bumpy ride. "No, it's just I suddenly realized that this wedding procession is missing something very important." "Missing what?" Nanfang asked. "We've prepared all that we need," Shilian smiled. "2 accompanying maids." The two outside exchanged a look. Then they both shuddered violently, seeming to have imagined something. Fu Yao replied, "Just pretend that the family's poor and there's no money at all to buy maids and deal with it." "All right," Shilian said. When the sedan-carrying military officers heard all this gag, they couldn't help but chuckle. With this, the displeasure did indeed disperse quite a bit, and a bit more camaraderie developed, making the sedan much steadier. Thus Shilian leaned back into a proper sitting position and closed his eyes to rest his mind. Unexpectedly, not long after, a child's laughter abruptly sounded by his ears. Hee hee ha ha, kiki chi chi. The laughter ripped across the mountains, ethereal and peculiar. However, the bridal sedan neither paused nor stopped, continuing steadily on its way. Not even Nanfang or Fu Yao made a noise, seeming to not have noticed anything amiss. Shilian opened his eyes and called in a low voice, "Nanfang, Fu Yao." From the left side of the bridal sedan, Nanfang answered, "What is it?" "Something's come," Shilian replied. By that time, this wedding procession had gradually entered the deeper parts of Mount Yujun. Quiet blanketed the wilderness, and the creaking of the wooden sedan, the crackling of the broken leaves and the branches when stepped on, the breathing of the sedan carriers, all seemed to sound louder in the silence. And that child's laughter still hadn't died. It was something distant, as if it came from deep within the woods, and sometimes close, as if it was leaning over the edge of the sedan. Nanfang grew serious. "I don't hear anything." Fu Yao said coldly, "Me neither." In that case, it was even more impossible for the sedan carriers to have heard anything. "That means it's purposely letting only me hear," Shilian said. The 8 military officers considered themselves experts in martial arts and also felt there was no pattern to the ghost groom taking brides, so they were confident they would go home empty-handed tonight and weren't frightened in the least. Yet for some reason, the 40-some military officers from before who mysteriously went missing delivering the bride suddenly came to mind, and a cold sweat appeared on some of their foreheads. Shilian sensed that some had stalled in their steps and said, "Don't stop. Pretend nothing is the matter." Nanfang waved, gesturing for them to keep going. Shilian then said, "It's singing." "What's it singing?" Fu Yao asked. Shilian listened carefully to the child's voice, then repeated verse by verse, a pause after each one. "New bride, new bride, new bride in the red bridal sedan." In the quiet of the night, his somewhat slow voice was clear, but while he was clearly the one reciting, it was as if those 8 military officers were hearing the voice of a young infant singing this old little nursery rhyme along with Shilian, making their blood run cold. Shilian continued, brimming with tears, past the hills, smile not. Under the bridal veil, the ghost... Is it the ghost groom? Or what is it? After a pause, Shilian said, "No, it keeps laughing. I can't hear clearly anymore." Nanfeng frowned. "What did that mean?" "It means exactly what you heard," Shilian said. "It's to tell the bride inside the sedan to only cry and not smile." "I meant, what's the meaning of this creature running over to give you hints like this?" Nanfeng said. Always having the opposite opinion, Fu Yao said, "It might not be giving hints. It's also possible that it's purposely trying to encourage the opposite, and only smiling can keep one safe and sound, but its objective is to trick people into crying. It's hard to say if the brides from the past were deceived like this." "Oh, Fu Yao, when hearing such a voice on the road, any normal bride would be scared to death. How could they smile?" Shilian said. "Besides, what's the worst that can happen, whether I cry or smile?" "Getting kidnapped," Fu Yao said. "And isn't that objective for tonight's outing?" Shilian asked. A hard sniff came out of Fu Yao's nose, but he stopped his rebuttal. Shilian continued, "And there's another thing I feel I must tell you both." "What?" Nanfeng asked. "I've been smiling ever since I mounted the bridal sedan," Shilian said. There was a pause. Just as he spoke, the body of the sedan abruptly dipped. There was suddenly a commotion outside among the 8 military officers, and the bridal sedan came to a complete stop. "Don't panic," shouted Nanfeng. Shilian raised his head slightly. "What's going on?" Fu Yao replied coolly, "Nothing. We've run into a bunch of beasts, that's all." Just as he answered, Shilian heard the sharp howl of wolves piercing the night sky. A pack of wolves was blocking the way. This didn't feel normal, no matter how Shilian thought about it. "Quick question. Are there often wolves running about on Mount Yujun?" One of the military officers carried the sedan answered, "It's unheard of before. How is this Mount Yujun?" Shilian raised his brows. Then we've come to the right place. There were only wild wolves of the mountains. They couldn't do anything to Nanfeng and Fu Yao, nor could they do anything to those military officers who spent years rolling around the edge of danger. It was just that they were all focused earlier on deciphering that bizarre and eerie nursery rhyme, which is why they were so taken by surprise. From deep within the woods in the dark of the night, pairs of haunting green wolf eyes lit up. One starving wolf after another slowly emerged from within the forest, surrounding them. However, it was so much better to face beasts one could see and hit than to face a creature one could neither hear nor touch. And so the group started rubbing their hands and clenching their fists, ready to get down to slaying. However, the good part was yet to come. What followed closely behind the wolves was the sound of rustling and cracking, a series of odd noises that sounded like beasts, but not quite, and like humans, but not. A military officer exclaimed in alarm, What's that? What is that thing?" Nanfeng also cursed. Shilian knew that something unexpected had happened and tried to stand. "What happened now?" Nanfeng immediately replied, "Don't come out." Shilian had only just raised his hand when the sedan violently jolted as if something had pressed against the door. He didn't lower his head, but he dropped his eyes slightly, and from beneath the bridal veil he saw the back of the head of something black. Oh. It had actually climbed into the sedan. The creature crashed headfirst through the sedan door, but then was forcibly dragged out by the man outside. Nanfeng swore in front of the sedan. "Fuck, it's a Binu." Shilian knew this was going to be downright troublesome the moment he heard it was a Benu. Based on the evaluation of the palace Lingwen, Benu were creatures that didn't even deserve to be ranked fierce. Allegedly, Benu were once humans, but by the looks of them now, even if they were considered humans, they'd be deformed humans. They had heads and faces, but the features were smeared and unclear. They had arms and legs, but were too weak to walk. They had mouths and teeth, but they couldn't bite anyone to death no matter how much they tried. But if there was a choice, everyone would rather run into the scarier, fierce, or malice-ranked ghosts than these creatures. This was because often Benu appeared at the same time as other monsters, demons, and ghosts. While the prey was distracted battling with the enemy, they'd suddenly pop out and use their untiring, pestering limbs, their sticky and gooey bodily fluids, and their endless reinforcements of companions to tangle up the prey like sticky candy. Even though their combat power was extremely low because their vitality was exceedingly tenacious, and they often appeared in large groups, it was impossible to shake them off, and also very difficult to kill them all quickly. Gradually, they would drain your strength and get you tripped up. That instance of carelessness, the opportunity for which your enemy was waiting for, would spell your end. And when the prey was killed by the other monsters and demons and ghosts, the Benu would pick at the remnant broken limbs of the stronger beings left over after eating. They'd eat with keen pleasure and gnaw at the bones full of holes and scraps. This was truly a very disgusting creature. For any heavenly official in the upper court, all they needed to do was release their spiritual light and summon their weapons, and those creatures would withdraw in fright. But to the junior officials of the middle court, those creatures were exceedingly vexing. Fu Yao spat with disgust from a far distance. I hate those things. Did the palace of Lingwen mention their presence here? No, Shilian said. Then what do we need them for? Fu Yao exclaimed. How many have come? Shilian asked. About 100, possibly more, Nanfeng replied. Don't come out. Creatures like Benu were strong in numbers, and over a dozen were already very difficult to manage. Over 100, that was more like enough to drag them to their deaths. They usually preferred to stay in areas heavily populated with people. He had never imagined there'd be so many on Mount Yujun. Shilian pondered for a moment, then raised his arm slightly, revealing a wrist that was half wrapped in bandages. Go on, he said. The moment those two words were spoken, the white bandage suddenly slipped off his wrist on its own like it was alive and flew out of the curtain of the bridal sedan. Shilian sat poised within the sedan and instructed gently, strangle them to death. In the black of night, it was as if that white silhouette of a viper suddenly slithered forth. When the silk white band was pretending to be a bandage wrapped around Shilian's wrist, it looked like it was only several meters long. Yet when it was slaughtering with such devilish lightning speed, it was like it was endless. A seamless series of cracking sounds later, dozens of wild wolves and Benu had their necks wrung in an instant. The 6 Benu wrapped around Nanfeng instantly fell to the ground dead. He sent a wild wolf flying with a strike of a hand, never dropping his guard once. He shouted with disbelief towards the sedan. What was that thing? Didn't you say you can't manipulate spiritual devices without spiritual powers? Shilian replied, There are always exceptions. Nanfeng was furious, and he slapped the sedan door. Shilian, explain properly right now what that thing was. Was it... His slap almost broke the entire sedan completely. Shilian had to quickly raise his hand to support himself against the door, slightly taken aback. The way Nanfeng spoke actually reminded him of how Fen Xing used to be when he was mad. Nanfeng was about to say more when suddenly the wailing of military officers came from the distance. Fu Yao said icily, If there's anything to say, say it after fighting this wave off first. Without any choice, Nan Fang had to rush over to rescue the people. Shi Lian swiftly snapped out of it and ordered, Nan Fang, Fu Yao, you guys lead first. Nan Fang whipped his head around. What? Shi Lian explained, if you guys are around the sedan, the creatures will keep coming and the fighting will never end. Take the men away first. I'll stay behind and meet this groom. Nan Fang was about to swear again. You'll be by yourself. However, Fu Yao said coldly, he can control that silk band, so nothing will happen for the moment. If you've got the time to drag your feet, then why don't you settle this group first, then come back and help. I'm off. Well, he certainly was snappy and carefree, leaving without a thought, dragging not a single step. Nan Fang clenched his teeth, knowing what Fu Yao said was true. So he turned to the military officers who were there. Come with me first. Sure enough, after they left the bridal sedan with that pack of wolves, and Binu were still pestering them, there weren't any new waves joining the fray. The two each escorted 4 military officers, and on the way, Fu Yao fought as he spat hatefully. I can't believe this. If I wasn't... He stopped mid-speech. The two met eyes, and the look was odd. Fu Yao swallowed his words and turned his head away, both temporarily stopping and not bringing it up. They then continued to hurry forward. Around the bridal sedan, corpses were strewn all over the ground. The silk band Ruyo, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, I'll figure it out, had already strangled every wolf in Binu that had lunged forward. It came flying back, gently wrapping itself back onto Shi Lian's wrist on its own. Shi Lian sat within the sedan quietly, surrounded by the infinite darkness and the rustling of the sea of trees. All of a sudden, everything fell quiet. The sound of the wind, the sound of the trees, the sound of the sea of trees, the howling, roaring, and demonic creatures all sank into deadly silence in an instant, as if they were afraid of something. And then he heard a very soft chuckle. It sounded like a man, but also a youth. Shi Lian sat poised and quiet. The silk band Roy was quietly encircling his hand, ready to strike at a moment's notice. If whoever had come showed a trace of killing intent, it would instantly, wildly strike back with 10 times the power. Yet unexpectedly, what came wasn't the anticipated attack or any murderous intent, but something else. The curtain of the bridal sedan was lightly lifted, and from underneath the bright red veil, Shi Lian saw a person had extended a hand to him. The fingers were well defined, and a red string was tied on the 3rd finger, and on that long, slender, fair hand, it looked like a bright and colorful affinity knot. Should he give his hand or no? Shi Lian maintained his composure. He hadn't decided yet. Should he continue to sit, tall and still, or pretend to be a bride who was frightened and at a loss, dodging back? The owner of that hand was rather patient, however, and incredibly well-mannered. Shi Lian didn't move, so that hand didn't move either, seeming to be waiting for his response. A moment later, as if something had taken control of him, Shi Lian reached out. He rose to his feet, ready to push aside the curtain to descend the sedan, but the man had already moved first, lifting the red curtain for him. This man who had come grasped his hand but didn't squeeze too hard, as if he was afraid of hurting him, somehow giving him the impression of taking the utmost care. Shi Lian had his head bowed and let the man guide him slowly out of the sedan. Below the veil, Shi Lian could see by his feet the dead body of a wolf that the silky band Ryu had strangled. An idea came to him, and Shi Lian lightly tripped, falling forward with an alarmed gasp. Here's the picture. The man immediately reached out and caught him. Shilian also twisted his hand to catch the man's helping arm and felt something cold. It turned out the man was wearing a pair of silver vambrances around his wrists. The vambrances were exquisitely beautiful, with primitive decorative patterns. Maple leaves, butterflies, and savage beasts were engraved upon them, quite mysterious and quite unlike anything from the Central Plains, more akin to the ancient artifacts of foreign tribes. The vambrances appeared to be polished and refined, locked around the man's wrists. Icy cold, silver and fair white hands, both were without trace of life, but carried an evil, killing aura. Shilian's trip and fall earlier was a feint. He had in mind to test the man who'd come. Roy had been circling languidly inside the large, expansive sleeves of his wedding robes, ready to strike at a moment's notice. However, the man only took his hand and guided him forward. Shilian purposely walked extremely slowly. This was because, 1, he couldn't see the path clearly with the veil on, and 2, he wanted to stall for time. Yet the other person matched his pace and walked slowly along with him, the other arm coming around to support him every now and then, as if afraid Shilian would trip again. No matter how high on his guard Shilian was, to be treated this way, he couldn't help but think, if he was a real groom, that he'd genuinely be the most gentle and considerate one. Then he suddenly heard an exceedingly soft clink sound. With every step the two took, the sound would ring crisply. Just as he was mulling over what the sound could be, there was suddenly a low, suppressed growls of beasts from all around. Wild wolves. Shilian jerked slightly, and the silk band Royo abruptly snapped tight around his wrist. Yet unexpectedly, before he could do anything, the man who was holding his hand softly tapped the back of that hand like he was comforting him, telling him not to worry. The 2 taps were so soft they could practically be called gentle. Shilian was slightly taken aback, but the low growling was already suppressed. When Shilian listened closely, he suddenly realized that these wild wolves weren't growling, but whimpering. It was clear the whimpering of the beasts that had reached the peak of fear and could not move while they struggled before death. Now his curiosity for who this man was grew even stronger. He wanted to lift the veil to look first and worry about everything else later, but he knew that that wasn't the best course of action at the moment, so he could only peek through the crack below the red covering, his view limited, and missed the larger picture. The only thing he saw was the lower hem of a vividly red robe. Below the red robes were a pair of black leather boots, walking languidly. Those black leather boots were wrapped tight around long, slender legs, looking mightily beautiful as they walked. On the sides of the black boots there were dangled 2 fine silver chains. With every step, the silver chains would sway, clinking and crinkling, sounding extremely pleasant to the ear. The steps were nonchalant but sprightly, much like those of a youth. However, with his every step was also confident, like there was nothing that could stand in his way. If anyone dared to block them, he'd rip them to pieces. Because of this, Shilian couldn't quite say just exactly who this character was. Just as he was deep in thought, something hauntingly white on the ground suddenly intruded on his vision. It was a skull. Shilian's steps faltered for a moment. He could immediately tell that the way the skull was placed was amiss. This was clearly a point of some magic formation, and if moved, the entire enchantment would probably attack this spot in an instant. But judging by that youth's steps, it was as if he didn't even notice there was anything here at all. Shilian was just considering whether he should warn him when he heard the crisp sound of a tragic crack. The youth stepped down and instantly crushed the skull to dust. And then, as if he sensed nothing, He walked over, stepping through that mound of dust indifferently. Shilian was speechless. With just one step, he crushed the entire enchantment into a mound of wasted dust. Just then, that youth's step paused. Shilian tensed, wondering if he was about to act. But the youth only stopped for a moment before continuing to guide Shilian along. After a couple of steps, suddenly there was a pitter-patter from above, as if beads of raindrops were beating down on the surface of an umbrella. Turns out that youth had opened an umbrella and raised it over both of their heads. Although it wasn't the time for it, Shilian couldn't help but praise inwardly that he was really quite thoughtful. But at the same time, he was also very curious. Is it raining? Oh, the mystic black mountain within the vast wilderness, somewhere deep in the far distant ranges, there came long howls of wolves. Perhaps it was because a slaughter had just occurred on the mountain, but the faint scent of blood was still permeating the cold, frigid air. Everything about this situation was eerie to the extreme, but that youth had held him in one hand and the umbrella in the other as he walked leisurely, appearing for no reason to be bewitchingly romantic and deeply affectionate. That strange shower came strangely and ended strangely as well. It wasn't long before the dripping sound of raindrops hitting the umbrella ended, and the youth also came to a stop. He seemed to have put away the umbrella, while at the same time he finally let go of Shilian's hand and moved one step closer. The hand that had been holding his own this entire way softly folded the corner of the veil and slowly lifted it upward. Shilian had been waiting for this moment the entire time. He stood still, watching as the clinging red curtain was slowly pulled up. The silk band shot out. It wasn't because the youth exuded a killing aura, but rather because he must be apprehended. Seize him first and talk later. Yet unexpectedly, when the silk ruoi flew out and carried with it a blast of wind, that bright red veil left the youth's hand, fluttering up and down. Before Shilian had a chance to see the remnant of shadow of that red-robed youth, Ruoi had shot through him. The youth shattered into thousands of silver butterflies, scattering into the breeze of silver twinkling stars. Well, it wasn't the time for it. After Shilian had backed a couple of steps away, he couldn't help but sigh in awe. This sight truly was as beautiful as a fantastic dream. Just then, one silver butterfly errantly flew past his eyes. When he tried to look closer, however, that single butterfly fluttered twice around him before joining the whirl of butterflies, melting into a part of the silver that enveloped the sky as they fluttered their wings into the night. It was a good while before Shilian came back around, and he wondered, so was that youth the ghost groom? In his opinion, he didn't think so. If those wolves on Mount Yujun were his subordinates, why would they appear so terrified upon seeing him? And that enchanted array on the way must have been set up by the ghost room, yet he so casually crushed it. The more he pondered, the stranger this was. But then Shilian tossed Roy over his shoulder and thought, well, whatever. He could also just be a passerby. I'll leave this for now and focus on the matter at hand. But after scanning around, it turned out there was a building not far away, standing there somberly. Since that youth had brought him here, and this building was so painstakingly hidden inside this enchantment array, Shilian decided he must go inside and take a look. Shilian took a few steps, then halted abruptly. After some thought, he turned back and picked up the veil from the ground. He dusted it off and clutched it in his hand before continuing to make his way to the building. This building was a tall structure with red walls, the bricks and wood appearing rather mottled, much like an aged local town temple. However, in Shilian's experience, this design was most likely a martial god temple. Sure enough, when he looked up, he saw the large, solidly metal words nailed to the top of the entrance, Temple of Mingguang. The martial god of the north, General Mingguang, was also the General Pei that Ling Wen spoke of in the communication array, whose worship was abundant in the north. No wonder they didn't find any temples of Mingguang nearby, but found a temple of Nanyang. Turns out the temple of Mingguang, Mount Yujun, had long since been locked away by an enchantment array. Could this ghost groom have anything to do with General Mingguang? However, this General Mingguang was a mighty and unapproachable great heavenly official, flush with his success. Additionally, his status in the north was very secure. Personally, Shilian didn't think a heavenly official like that would have any connection with a malicious creature like the Ghost Groom. It wasn't strange to have one's base be overtaken by a malicious creature without one's knowledge. He'd have to wait and see what the truth really was. He walked up to the temple and the doors were closed but not locked, so when he pushed, they opened. After the pushing the doors in, a strange smell assaulted his senses. It wasn't the dusty air common to an unvisited place of many years, but rather the faint stench of rot. Shilian closed the door behind him to make it seem like no one had entered. Then he crossed the threshold into the temple. At the center of the great hall was a martial god statue, naturally that of the martial god of the north, General Mingguang. Humanoid objects such as sculptures, puppets, and portraits were easily tainted by the aura of evil. Thus, the first thing Shilian did was go up and look closely at the martial god statue. After he examined it for a while, his conclusion was this divine statue was exquisitely sculpted. Wielding a sacred sword and wearing a jade belt, his appearance was handsome, with an imposing bearing. There weren't any issues, and the rotting smell didn't come from the divine statue either. Thus Shilian put it out of his mind and started to make his way back to the great hall. When he turned around, Shilian froze completely, and his pupils shrank. A group of women dressed in bright red wedding robes with their heads covered with veils stood tall before him. The faint stench of rot was exuding from these women. Shilian quickly composed himself, then started counting 1, 2, 3, 4, until he counted to 17. There were 17 brides who went missing in the Mount Yujun area. The red on some of the wedding dresses is faded and looked exceedingly old and tattered, so he assumed they were the earliest brides who went missing. Some of the brides were still wearing the brand new wedding dresses, and the styles were new too. The smell of aged, rotting corpse was still very light on them, so they must be the ones who went missing more recently. Shilian thought for a moment, then he removed the veil of one of the brides. There was a tragically pale face under the bright red veil, so white that it had faintly glowing green. With the soft light of the moon shining upon it, it was quite horrifying. But the most horrifying part was, while the muscles of the woman's face were already contorted with death, on this face there hung a stiff smile. Shilian pulled off the veil of the next woman, and there were the same curled lips. An entire building full of dead people. They were all dressed in wedding robes with smiles on their faces. The strange nursery rhymes sung by that child seemed to be ringing in Shilian's ears again. New bride, new bride, new bride in the red bridal sedan, brimming tears past the hills, smile not under the bridal veil. Suddenly there was a strange sound coming from outside the temple. It truly was a strange sound, so strange that it was hard to describe. Like two rods wrapped heavily in cloth were violently thumping on the forest floor, but also like something heavy was being pulled with difficulty along the ground. The sound traveled far and came close very quickly. It was merely an instant before it reached the entrance of the temple of Mingguang. Creak! The doors of the temple of Mingguang opened. Whatever had come, whether it be a human or a creature, was the most likely that ghost room. And now it had returned. There was nowhere to escape at the back of the hall, nor anywhere to hide. Shi Lian's mind spun for a second. Seeing the row of brides, he instantly put on his own veil, joining the line and standing still. If there were only 5 or 6 corpses standing here, then of course it'd be easy to see the numbers weren't correct, but there were 17 corpse brides here, and unless each one was counted like he did earlier, it'd be difficult to notice someone was mixed in. He'd only just joined the line before he heard that strange thump, 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 thump walk in. Shi Lian remained still while he pondered. What exactly is this sound? By the lengthened pause, it's a bit like the sound of footsteps, but what creature's footsteps sound like this? It's definitely not the youth who brought me here. He was extremely at ease when he walked. He clinked. Suddenly, he realized something, and his heart jumped to his throat. Oh no, my height is wrong. These corpses were all women, but he was very much a man, and was born a notch taller than most women. While an extra person couldn't be noticed at a glance, if there was someone particularly tall in the group of corpses, that would be very noticeable. But then again, Shi Lian's mind turned, and he quickly collected himself once more. He certainly was taller than these brides, but the girl Xiao Ying had only bound his hair simply and didn't do much else with it, and the brides were all dressed to the nines, their hairdos shooting for the sky. There were even some who were wearing phoenix crowns and giant piece rising high on their heads, so he might not be shorter than him considering. Even if he was taller, he shouldn't be that conspicuous. Just as he was thinking, he heard a shh sound that was about 6 meters away from him. A moment later, there was another shh, and this time it was a bit closer. Shi Lian realized what the ghost groom was doing. It was pulling off the veil of each one of the brides, checking the face of the corpses one by one. Wham! If he didn't strike now, when would there be a better time? The silky band Royu shot out and hit the ghost groom squarely. There was a loud rumble, and a black mist assaulted his face. Shi Lian didn't know whether that evil was toxic or not, but since he had no spiritual light to shield his body, he immediately covered his nose and mouth. At the same time, he prompted Royu to swirl widely to vent the air and disperse the black mist. There was another thump, 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 and when Shi Lian cracked open his eyes, he saw a short, small form by the entrance of the temple flash past. The entrance was thrown open and a ball of black mist bolted for the forest. Shi Lian made the decision on the spot and chased after it immediately. Yet who knew he hadn't gone far before he saw fires blazing in the woods. The screams and shouts of a rampage came from the distance. Charge! The voice of a youth, particularly loud and clear. Catch that ugly freak and exterminate evil for the people. Catch the ugly freak and exterminate evil for the people. We'll split the bounty evenly. It was indeed Xiao Peng too. Shi Lian inwardly let out a frustrated cry. This group had said they were going to come to the mountain, and they actually did. There was originally an enchanted array concealing the area. But that had been crushed to smithereens by the youth earlier, and this group, with their blind luck, actually found the place. Upon a second look, the direction of the noise came from just so happened to be the direction in which the ghost groom had fled. Shi Lian grabbed Roy and charged out, shouting, "Don't move!" The group froze for a moment. He was about to say more when he heard Xiao Peng Tu inquire enthusiastically, "Miss, you were kidnapped by the ghost groom, right? What's your name? We're here to rescue you. You can relax now." Shi Lian was taken aback, finding this hilarious before remembering that he was still dressed in woman's attire. There were no mirrors inside the Temple of Nanyang, so he had no idea how he looked right now. But from their reactions, Miss Xiao Ying's hand must be adept. In their shock, the group actually took him for a real bride, and this Xiao Ping Tu was probably hoping Shi Lian would be the 17th bride so he could go collect the reward money. However, given the situation, he could not allow those villagers to run amok under any circumstances. Moreover, he couldn't guarantee that the ghost groom had continued to flee. Coincidentally, right then, 2 black-clad youths came rushing over. Shi Lian immediately called, "Nanfang, Fu Yao, come aid me, quick!" Yet who knew when those 2 heard and looked over, they were both taken aback, and then backed a couple of steps away in unison. Shi Lian had to ask many times before they came around. "Did you 2 come from that direction? Did you run into anything on the way?" "No," Fan Ying replied. "Good," Shi Lian said. "Fu Yao, follow this path immediately and search the surrounding area. Make sure the ghost groom hasn't escaped." Fu Yao turned and left when he heard these instructions. Shi Lian then said, "Nanfang, you stay and guard this place and make sure not a single person leaves. If Fu Yao doesn't find the ghost groom on the mountain, then it must be in that crowd right now." Upon hearing this, commotion erupted within the crowd. Xiaoping too had realized he wasn't a woman by now, and he was the first to jump. "Not a single one can leave? On what grounds? Are there no laws in this land? Guys, don't listen to them." He hadn't yet landed from his jump when Nanfang struck out a palm, and a large tree as wide as a man's hug snapped and collapsed. The crowd instantly remembered that this young man chopped that pillar, and then any form of monetary repayment would be useless, so they all shut up. Xiaoping Tu exclaimed, "You said the ghost groom is among us? Every single one of us has a proper name and family. Don't believe me? Use the torch, light up everyone's face, and check individually." "Nanfang?" Shi Lian called. Nanfang took the torch from Xiaoping Tu and went around to shine it on every single person. Each face was covered in sweat or nervous, or at a loss or excited, all extremely spirited. Shi Lian couldn't discern anything. He came before the crowd. "Everyone, I apologize for the offense earlier, but I injured the ghost groom and it escaped. It definitely couldn't have gone far. My 2 young friends here didn't run into it on the way here, so I'm afraid this creature is mixed in with the group. Will you please take a good look at each other, see each other's faces clearly, and check if there's anyone you don't recognize in the crowd." When the crowd heard that the ghost groom could be mixed within their own group of people, their blood ran cold. They didn't dare to be careless. They peered at each other. You looking at me and me looking at you. They had looked for a while when there was a sudden yell. "Why are you here?" Shi Lian's brows shot up and rushed over. "Who is it?" Xiaoping Tu snatched someone else's torch and shined it at the corner of the crowd. "This ugly freak." The one he was pointing at was Xiao Ying. Xiao Ying's slanted eyes and crooked nose appeared somewhat contorted under the firelight, and she had her arms raised to block her face, looking like she couldn't bear to be exposed under the firelight's glare. I was worried, so I wanted to come up and look." Seeing how alarmed she looked, Shi Lian took the torch away in Xiaoping Tu's hand and turned to the others. "How is it, everyone?" The group all shook their heads. "There isn't anyone we don't know. We've seen everyone here. Could it be possessing someone?" Nanfang asked. Shi Lian hummed for a moment. "It's doubtful. That was a solid body." "Since it's a wrath, it's hard to say whether it can change shape," Nanfang said. While the 2 were hesitating, Xiaoping Tu was the first to shout, "The ghost groom isn't among us. Do you see? If you see, then why won't you let us go?" Scattered voices agreed here and there. Shi Lian gave them a sweeping look. "Will everyone please stay here in front of this temple of Mingguang and not move even half a step away?" The group was about to complain again, but when they saw Nanfang's cold glare, they didn't dare. Just then, Fu Yao also returned. He reported, "There's nothing nearby." Gazing at his heavily packed crowd before the temple of Mingguang, Shi Lian slowly said, "Then it must be one of these people." And that's the end of chapter 3. Looks like I am out of time, so I will read another one in a day or two. Thanks for listening.